Good morning. Thank you for having me, Karen, Gary. Welcome, everyone. I think we didn't coordinate it, and as far as I know, Sir and I have never met. But your talk is really the background for what we are trying to do, and that is to look at the addition, if you like, of gut feeling into the capture of elder abuse. And we are trying to do that in a scientific way. So I'll try and summarize our findings, which are part of an ongoing project at the Dunedin School of Medicine, Department of Psychological Medicine, where we have an interest group of researchers looking into elder abuse. My colleagues and great contributors to the project are Professor Robin Turner, who is, I think I told Tim Footy earlier today, probably the brightest mind in New Zealand that I know at the moment. She's a biostatistician, and she's really the main axis of our group. Professor Paul Glue, who's the head of psychiatry at the Dunedin School of Medicine, and myself. I don't think the audience here needs to read what all the adult abuse is, but I think that the focus for us when we are talking to assessors is the breaking trust in a relationship where abuse obviously happens, and their ability to notice that as they go into people's home and do their interviews. Although adult abuse, of course, happens when, by definition, someone is 65 years or older. It's very hard to know what is the true prevalence of OAA. Across most high-income and middle-income countries, studies have shown, especially in Europe, where they had some very large projects trying to assess the prevalence, anywhere from 10 to 30% of older adults will be abused in a given year. There are various subtypes of abuse, but all in all, these are the rates that we are looking at. Why are cases often missed? And that's relevant to the project we are doing. Because abuse is stigmatized, and people don't like to report about it. Other adults are frequently unable to participate in research due to either impairment of mental faculties, ill health, or just the fact that they do not feel safe being part of research around abuse. There is a lot of non-disclosure, and that comes again to what Sarah was saying when an InterRAI assessor goes into the home, and in 74% of cases around the world, the abuser is a close family member, usually a child, sometimes a primary caretaker. If they are there for the interview, how sure can we be that the other person is reporting truly on the relationship? And that's where the assessor's gut feeling and notes come into play. Sometimes victims of OAA have very good reason to fear the consequences, either directly or indirectly. It is sometimes very, very, very difficult to untangle the abuse network around other people. It can be as subtle as, not seeing your grandkids for weeks on end because you didn't give your credit card to your kids, or it can be as crude as someone pushing around physically an older parent because of. There are also inconsistencies surrounding the definition of OAA. There is a complexity of reporting the cases, and unfortunately, there is a lack of clear legal and legislative guidelines as to what one does when abuse is suspected. We've had families who have put in a complaint against our teams when abuse was suspected, and we had a discussion and we wanted to report it. And they sort of lawyered up and filed a complaint against myself or other members of the team in sort of how dare you say we're doing this. And that can influence the assessor if a family member is there and is very confrontative about it. And last but not least, I think we all know that the existing abuse screening tools are really not up to par. So the first leg of our, if you like, six-part journey doing research on elder abuse was published quite a few years ago with the help of Philippa Pitt Greco, who is the manager for the Care Coordination Center in what used to be the SDHB or Dunedin and Otago. And we just simply wanted to see, does the InterRAI elder abuse capture a reasonable section, if you like, of the people who are potentially being abused. New Zealand was over 65 in the what was then the SDHB. We looked only at the first InterRAI home care assessment. We sort of studied a period of 6 years. You all know the abuse cap. Abuse cap is triggered into moderate or high level of abuse risk or suspicion. And that's something we may have a few questions about is the InterRAI abuse cap actually does not have an external validation. It's sort of a closed system. It is a high level of suspicion, but is it really validated? And that's another part of the research journey we are trying to complete. So what did we find? We find that the ACAP is triggered in a sample of nearly 19,000 home care assessments in the SDHB, only in about 3%. That obviously is if we are taking either the very lowest estimate of annual abuse to be 10% or 12% or 15%, not even as high as 30% in some countries, we are still, the InterRAI is underperforming by probably a factor of 4 or 5. And that is, if that is our main way of capturing elder abuse, then that is very, very, very concerning. And that's why we are committed to improving that. So the InterRAI is currently not sensitive enough. We need to improve what we are doing when we are trying to capture OAA high-risk cases or cases that are suspected. So we went on to the second leg of our research, which was, can we actually improve detection rates of the InterRAI by changing the, if you like, the algorithm or the software behind the abuse cap triggering. So we're not going to, at first, we thought there's no need to change the data. There is a need to change the way we look at the data. The InterRAI is the InterRAI. That's what we have. Can we do better with the current InterRAI assessment, the home care assessment? So what in essence we were doing is, I think, complements what Sars was saying about gut feeling. We said very frequently when we sort of did off-record interviewing with assessors, they said, we go away from an interview, we don't have enough solid information to tick the checkpoints that will trigger the ACAP, the abuse cap, but we feel that there was a lot of tension and something was not right when we came to these questions that have to do with elder abuse. So they go away saying to themselves, and luckily they have the option to say, unable to determine. We can't say if but something didn't feel right. We are not going away feeling, yes, there is a high suspicion of abuse, or no, everything is fine in relation to abuse around that client. We wanted to see if we add the unable to determine, if you like, group, the gut feeling group of the assessors, to the A cap, how would that look? Does that give us more information? Is the information accurate? In essence, we wanted to see whether these two groups are very similar. If they are very similar, then yes, we have to add that, if you like, unable to determine or gut feeling to our capture of a potential OAA. When we did, we saw that we can nearly double. We have 2.6% of our clients who trigger the ACAP, but 2.2% would also have been triggering the ACAP if we took the unable to determine as a positive sense of potential abuse. So we are nearly doubling the capture rate, which is, we believe, quite a step forward. So yes, the UDA category represents the gut feeling, if you like, of the experienced interviewers. And if we want the InterRAI to become a gatekeeper, a screening tool, if you like, although it was not designed as one for elder abuse, we need to factor in the UDA. That's what we believe. But this was just a signal. So we were very, 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 very lucky and privileged that the Elder Abuse Prevention Fund thought that what we are saying may make some sense, and they were able to help fund the next leg in our journey. We wanted to analyze a national data set, not just the SDHB. The SDHB data set has its own, of course, quirks and biases. Obviously, ethnic groups in Otago are very, 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 very much underrepresented. There's just one set of assessors who are trained in a certain way. I think they're trained brilliantly. If we have time, we'll say something about how our findings change their training and maybe a recommendation for all of us. But just focusing on the SDHB dataset is not good enough, so we wanted to go nationally, and the Elder Abuse Fund, Prevention Fund project helped us do that. So essentially, we wanted to replicate what we were doing with the unable to determine on a national set. We were able, with Costa's help, who was just amazing. He was just unbelievable for us, and always has been. We managed to have a clean set of well over 186,000 individual home care assessments. And what we saw is that if we add the unable to determine factor, the gut feeling factor of the assessor, into triggering the ACAP, we move up from 2.5% nationally to 5.9%. We think it's a huge way forward. What did we find? That after adjustment for other variables in the model, if you ask me anything about it, I wouldn't be able to answer because I know nothing about statistics. That's what Professor Robin Turner does. I stopped understanding statistics after trying to understand how one does an average of a couple of numbers. That's as far as my brain could take it, but you know, psychiatrists are not scientists. Well, present company excluded. Anyway, the model that our statistician created, we were looking, for example, at gender. So when we adjust for other variables, gender does not seem to affect the UDA group, but it does seem to affect the abuse cap group. And again, other associations as well, for example, living alone, which was a very strong variable associated with potentially triggering the ACAP, was not that strong in the UDA. But all in all, the pattern of associations, variables that are associated with triggering the ACAP remain very similar with the unable to determine group, to the point that the two groups are practically indistinguishable. So what we were able to say in a general sense is that the UDA group, people who will have been triggered as ACAP if we took the unable to determine as a positive sense of something being wrong, potentially elder abuse. The UDA group seems to share the very same characteristics as the ACAP triggered group, but less extreme in these variables and characteristics. So that's a table. I hope you can see that. So we're looking at variables like gender, age, living alone, presence of depression, independent in ADLs, and ethnicity. And you can see that there are very few differences between the unable to determine group versus the ACAP, but the main differences that I wanted to highlight here is the fact that both the ACAP triggering the abuse cap in the InterRAI or unable to determine by the assessor when interviewing a client are very different when it comes to Maori versus other populations or other Asian New Zealanders versus other populations. So, and I think that's an important message. And again, we had sort of a presentation discussion about that the InterRAI may have different sensitivities for different ethnic groups when it comes to triggering the abuse cap. And that's something we really need to dig deep into and understand. And again, I think as a policy, maybe training InterRAI assessors may need to make them aware of that, because when they are going to interview different ethnic older adults, they need to think about the elder abuse cap differently. What do we propose? We propose that by adapting the InterRAI criteria to include the unable to determine whether abuse occurred category to be part of triggering the elder abuse cap, we will more than double the capture rate, and we could substantially improve, obviously through that, the protection for this vulnerable population. I would like to, we are on time, Gary, so I'd like to mention 2 or 3 more things, and then in consultation with Karen, maybe just to read a little pointer from our Care Coordination Center in the leading. We are moving on with this research to do 2 more things. One is to look at what is the distribution of the variables that are picked in order to flag elder abuse. So in essence, if you look at the long list of criteria for the abuse cap, about half of them are physical, like weight loss or dehydration, and about half of them are psychosocial, like being frightened of a family member, etc. And what does actually trigger the ACAP in New Zealand? Are we more heavily weighted towards the physical symptomatology or phenomenology? Are we more heavily weighted towards psychosocial issues? We think analyzing that kind of distribution, again, will have practical value for training the assessors, but also will give us a sense of, if you like, a more weighted way of looking at the variables instead of assuming that they are all equal. So that's where we are going next. And last but not least, we are going to look at hopefully externally validating the abuse cap in the InterRAI by looking at people who triggered abuse cap versus the rest of the home care assessment population. Are they more frequently visiting ED departments? Are they more frequently being admitted to inpatient care? These 2 external validation sort of outcomes have been tested all over the world and are very, very, very much correlated with elder abuse. Can we show that that's true in New Zealand for the InterRAI? If we do, then we've come full circle and we believe that we can rely on the InterRAI as a sort of screening tool for elder abuse, although it was not designed to be one. So that's where we are going next with our research. And last but not least, before questions, Filippa Greco that I mentioned, as Nigel told me before the presentation, we couldn't do decent InterRAI research in Otago and Southland without her help. She's committed and amazing. She's part of our ongoing project, and when she realized that the gut feeling of the assessors is so important, she created a training program together with the VIP team at the hospital. So that's one point she wanted for me to put across. That may be a way to improve our sensitivity. And the other point is that she wanted us to discuss whether the elder abuse questions should be added to the contact assessment. We added a COVID screener during COVID, so it may be doable, she says. It is tricky, but and it is not easy, but it may be another piece in the puzzle if we are going to improve capture of elder abuse. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Yoram. We have time for a couple of questions.
I'd be very curious about potential unintended consequences if it became sort of widely known that InterRAI assessors were looking for signs of abuse, whether that would actually deter people from seeking needs assessments, and perhaps the most vulnerable people might be the ones most affected. That would be my concern.
It is indeed our concern too. We've had several discussions with the Office for Seniors around the legal implications of conceptualizing and maybe even formalizing that part of the interview as a screen, a valid screen for elder abuse. Obviously, it's not going to go unnoticed by families or policymakers. They believe that once we have completed our project, and the third part of our project is currently under review, and hopefully the VNJ will accept it or any other important journal. Once it has been, if you like, peer-reviewed and published in a high-profile journal, they believe we need to go to the Ministry of Justice and have a discussion about the implications of this. I think it's obviously going to be important and meaningful. I don't know how we will transcend that obstacle.
Question from me. Would the next phase of the research involve in talking to the InterRAI assessments unable to be determined? There can be a whole lot of reasons, isn't it? Maybe the person not verbal, for example.
Yes. So obviously unable to determine is a basket kind of saying or sense, but at least from again, as I said, doing research only in the SPHP, when we talk to assessors unable to determine around the variables that trigger the ACAP, is they simply say, we go away feeling something is wrong. We have not had a sense that we can trust or fully tick off the criteria. We are unable to do that because something in the part of the interview around questions pertinent to elder abuse felt wrong, whether the client himself or herself were sort of hesitant or unsure or gave answers that were obviously maybe not reflecting reality. Presence of other family members in a sense that the client is glancing at them before answering and not really fully cooperating. But yes, obviously the UBA is a complex concept.
Maybe the easy way is to add a box tag to the we need further investigation. Okay. That's a question. One more question. One more.
Oh, hello. Oh,
Question. So it's very long.
Yeah, there are some questions in the online. One,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. If you can raise your voice, please.
the question is, more can be done to identify the situation. It's the what we do with the information and how we manage incidents that are identified requires more resources and expertise.
If I was the Minister of Health, I would have something to say about that. What do we do once we identify someone, once the ACAP has been triggered? Very complex. There are no legal requirements for us to report this. So, and I think that's discriminatory. When we talk to people in EDs, for example,
There is legal
I think that what we need to do with the information, we need to be more clear that even at the risk of being wrong or offending certain family members or certain communities, we have to take the ACAP, if triggered, and do something about it legally as well as practically. I don't think it can be just a piece of data. That's me. Do we need to do better? Obviously. You know, one of the points that Peter's brought up is that EDs, at least in the South Island or in Otago and Southland, do not screen for elder abuse. They only screen for family violence and child abuse. Why? Because it is so complex. So there's so much more we need to do about elder abuse.
One last question.
hi. I'm just wondering if there is any data or any comparison between those who trigger the abuse cap through InterRAI and those who come to elder abuse response services through other channels.
I think, again, a great question, because that would be such a valuable sort of external validation of the InterRAI. I've been a member of the elder abuse panel for age concern in the meeting for many, many years. As far as I can tell from my experience there, it may be different in other elder abuse panels across the country. The number of cases that age concern can accept, review, and discuss are so small that they would be, I believe, again, a very different, unique, biased cohort to compare with, you know, the immensity of the InterRAI data.
Thank you, Yoram.